Hey guys, let's talk about the bridge murder case and the 3 ways to consider evidence and whether it can be determined with confidence. Let's call that confident beyond a reasonable doubt. Sounds like a term that could catch on. Anyway, with confidence, who committed the crime? The first way is to quickly come to a conclusion and then filter all information, taking as gospel anything that supports your opinion and disregarding anything that goes against your opinion. This kind of thinking is called social media logic. The second way is simply to consider the evidence and whether that paints a clear enough picture that our intuition, our gut, says, yes, I'm confident. That's good old-fashioned common sense reasoning, and it's the way we usually do things. There's nothing wrong with it. The third is to go full galaxy brain and testing that intuition, that common sense, against a more rigorous approach based on logic and probability analysis. In the end, it's all about probability, not certainty. It's built into the criminal justice system by necessity. A person can be arrested on probable cause. There's already a probability judgment. In civil cases, it's usually a verdict based on more likely than not. So that's said to be 51%, just over halfway. That's enough to win in civil court. But in criminal cases, to take away someone's freedom, we ask for more. And that makes sense, doesn't it? We ask a high probability. We call it beyond reasonable doubt. That's up there, but it's not 100%. We don't have to have seen it ourselves. It's high confidence and the like, however you want to describe it. There's slippery definitions all over the law and in writings. But it's not beyond any doubt, just reasonable doubt, not fantasy imaginations or aliens and eagles and things. Convinced. You have to be convinced. So that's not 100%, but it's not 51% either. Is it 75%? It sounds low to me. If a plane had a 75% chance of not crashing, would you get in it? Nah, that's not a very convincing number. Well, the law won't give you a number. Sometimes you've heard the old saying, it's better to let 10 guilty men walk free than 1 innocent man be condemned. Not that you've ever done the math on it, or I have either, but that rule requires something over 90% confidence. And I feel like as far as math is concerned, that's getting pretty close. If I told you there was a briefcase with $1 million in it, you can have it if you open the case, but there's a catch. There's a higher than 90% chance the case is booby-trapped with a bomb that will kill you when you open it. Yeah, that would get a no way from me. Anyway, think about it. You don't have to have a percentage right now, but you'll see why I brought it up in a little bit. All right, let's go over the case. Now remember, the goal of this video isn't to convince you that Richard Allen is guilty or that he's not guilty. The goal is to develop and explore with you a thinking tool to look at this case or any other case or anything, really. This will help you frame out what outside information is influencing your opinion, how you're weighing that information, and how your intuition is matching up to a math formula-based answer. So first, the crime. It's not the murders of Libby and Abby, it's the kidnapping. Richard Allen is charged with felony murder. That doesn't mean murder's a felony. Of course it is. It's a term of art, and it applies when someone is killed in the commission of another serious crime, and the person who didn't actually perhaps do the killing was participating in the serious crime. The law will hold you responsible for murder. In many cases, that's called felony murder. Yes, murder is a felony. This is just different. Trust me, it's just the name of it. It's like lightning bug. There's no lightning there. Work with me a little bit. I didn't name this stuff. Anyway, Richard Allen is charged with felony murder, and that means the girls were killed resulting from another serious crime, and in this case, that's kidnapping. And that occurred when someone, whether it was him or someone else, ordered them down the hill. Kidnapping can mean different things in different states and have different requirements. Trust me, doing what happened on that video, especially with a gun, counts as kidnapping under Indiana law. Anyway, the crime at issue here is the kidnapping, okay, because that precipitated the murders. Because of the video Libby took, we know where and when this occurred. That's a big bonus over a lot of crimes. Look at the Murdaugh case that just happened, where we had to sort of infer when it probably occurred based on when the cell phones of the victims fell silent. You know, you don't know that. You're just believing it because of this other circumstantial evidence. Anyway, here, they pretty much videoed when the kidnapping occurred and consequently where it occurred. It was on the southeast side of the High Bridge at approximately 2:13 p.m. And we'll call that the crime zone, the place and the time. If you were on the High Bridge last week at 2:13 p.m., you don't have anything to do with this crime. And if you were on the High Bridge that day, but say at 8 in the morning, then you're not the person in the video doing the kidnapping either, or at least you would have had to come back to do it. So we're going to call that the crime zone, both the time and the place. If we become convinced of who was on the bridge with Libby and Abby at that moment in time in that video, then we know who kidnapped them. And whoever kidnapped them is going to be found guilty of felony murder because they were murdered shortly after that. And it's pretty damn clear that the purpose of kidnapping them was to take them and do something to them. And the result, whether it was originally intended or not, was their deaths. Now, the video, it's really frustrating, and it's one of the reasons this case is so popular, because the resolution is just not quite good enough to establish identity, or we wouldn't be talking about this. But it still does a lot for us. As I said, it gives us where precisely. It gives us when precisely. It gives us sex. It's a man. It gives us race. It's a white guy. It gives us the implement, a gun. It gives us the direction he was approaching from when the crime occurred. He was on the northwest side of the bridge walking toward them. So we're going to use a Bayesian calculator. This is a tool based on a theorem and formulas that are used to calculate the probability of the accuracy of certain hypotheses. So if you say X happened because of these things, it will work up a probability for you that that's correct or not. I'm not going to try and explain the formula, but I will put the link at the bottom in case you want to use the calculator or you want to learn about the formula. We're just going to use it in this case, and you'll see how it works as a tool. So the first thing you have to do for this, and which also makes sense as well, is figure out, well, based on this initial information we had, the time of the crime and the place of the crime, do we have a universe of people? I think they called it in the Murdaugh case, the circle of people who could potentially have done this crime, because that's going to exclude most of the people in the world, right? So let's do that. Let's set that with no judgment against any of these people. We'll say, hey, you were close enough that you could have been involved. So there was, at the time and the place, at least, Richard Allen, by his own testimony. He was there. Doesn't mean he did it. It just means he was there. Who else might have been there? Now, he was there. He said he was there. He was in proximity to this crime. That's not really speculation. Putting anyone else there will be speculation, but I think that's fair to do because there are other possible scenarios. So the first one we'll go with there is Ron Logan. The girls were found on his property. He bears some resemblance to the person in the video. So, and he was investigated, of course. So, but let's throw him in there. He could be a stand-in for another property owner too, but since he was mentioned and it was on his property, let's put him in there. So now we got Richard Allen and we got a Ron Logan, right? Two people that possibly did it. Now, there wasn't anybody else on the bridge from the testimony of Richard Allen and other witnesses, or at least coming from the northwest side of the bridge. So our universe is extremely limited there. But people have brought up, and I don't disagree, that if it wasn't Ron Logan, there still could have been somebody waiting on the southeast side of the bridge to abduct the girls, a person unknown. You know, there could be potential names or whatever, but we don't know who that was because nobody ever saw that person other than the video. So we'll call that person John Doe. So we got Richard Allen on the left side of the bridge, who was there by himself, said he didn't see any other guys. And then we got two other potentially there people who were never seen there, but they could have been there waiting on the right east side of the bridge, southeast side. So that's three people. And I think that's a fair universe for that. The only other person known to be around at that point was the female witness, but it wasn't a female on the video. And plus her car was videotaped leaving 1 minute after the abduction occurred. So it's not her. So we got three people. Let's start setting up the math. Now, this is good and bad news for these three guys, right? Because when you do this with no other information, there's no reason to think any one of them is more likely to have done it than any of the others. But one of them did it. So that's a 33% chance because it did happen. It didn't maybe happen. It happened. There's a video of it. So if somebody went to trial just on this, I would vote not guilty right with you. I would say, yeah, you got Allen there, but you haven't done anything to show me why he's more likely than these other two guys to have done it, much less beyond a reasonable doubt. But still, that's our starting point. That's our crime zone and the people who were in it or could have been in it at the time. So 33% for each. Now, when you consider probability, though, you have to look at all the pieces and consider how they relate and consider their cumulative effect. For example, when you solve a jigsaw puzzle, you don't look at one piece and say, I have no idea what this is, and then find another and say, I have no idea what this is. This puzzle is unsolvable. Instead, you work probability. You find edge pieces because edge pieces are more likely to connect to other edge pieces, and you put them together. Corner pieces are good. Blue pieces next to blue pieces, green next to green. And eventually the pieces start to fit together and you get a picture developing. And eventually you're going to know what that picture develops. And most puzzles, you know what it is before you put the final piece in. You don't have to have 100% of the information before you're certain you know what it is, even if you never saw the box. So that's kind of how this formula is going to work for probability. It's how many pieces of the puzzle, depending on which pieces there are, do you need before you can be certain. So we're going to start stepping into the evidence of the case for these three guys, and we'll put it into the formula based on what the formula needs to know. And that's two things. And one is, how likely is this piece of evidence to be there, to be true, if your hypothesis, i.e. that we're testing whether Richard Allen is guilty or not, if that's true? How likely is that evidence to be there if he's not guilty? In other words, your hypothesis is wrong. So we'll have a likelihood for, yeah, that adds up. That would be there because he's guilty to X percentage, or that would be there, he's not guilty to X percentage. And the formula will do the lifting for us, and we'll work through the information and see which pieces do what. So a first piece of information, let's just start with the video, right? That's the closest thing. That's the actual crime recorded. And I said it told us some information, right? Like it's a dude, it's a white dude. But I think it is fair to say that that description, while it's consistent with Richard Allen, it's also consistent with Logan. I mean, people thought it was Logan. It could be either one of them. And it certainly could be John Doe because we don't know what John Doe looks like. And while you might weight it more likely for, say, Logan and Allen because we do know what looks like them and we don't know for John Doe, people also make the point that this basically fits, as pixelated as it is, about anybody you're going to see out there on the trail. So to me, there's not any more likely than not that this description suggests any of the three of these guys. So to me, that doesn't move the needle at all. It doesn't go into the formula. If you put the formula equal weighting that it helps and equal weighting that it hurts, the formula doesn't change your percentage. And that makes sense, right? So here, that information doesn't show me that it's Richard Allen or not. And also, it doesn't show me more likely or not that it makes him innocent, because it's just a common thing there. It's just that's how they look out there. And I buy that. I think that's fair. So, but I'm going to get that out of the way, that it doesn't do anything. There's a gun involved, right? Okay, does that suggest one of these three guys? More likely than not, or not likely, right? So Richard Allen owned guns, or okay, so it could have been him. Ron Logan owned guns, could have been him. And I think it's also fair to not discount, even though you could, because some people don't own guns, and we don't know who John Doe is. I'm not going to discount it because most of the dudes up there probably own guns, and whoever's coming to commit a kidnapping is probably going to bring a gun. So to me, again, the fact that the video says there was a gun involved, while that can be important, it is important later. Right now, it doesn't tell us who are the three. So we got a couple things out of the way that just don't change the equation at all. They're interesting to know about the video and see the video, but they don't help us figure out which one of these people did it. So the video does show somebody on the bridge with the girls walking toward them, and that person kidnaps them. So we have a piece of evidence here that there was somebody on the bridge kidnapping them, one guy by himself, and there was a person on the bridge. You just can't ignore that. Sorry, you can't ignore it. It's not a slam dunk by itself, but that one's going into the equation. So before we feed it into the equation, we have to do what I said, which is say to the computer that I think that this evidence would be there and be true if my hypothesis of Richard Allen's guilt is correct, X percentage, and also it supports a not guilty to X percentage. But again, it doesn't matter that it's Richard Allen, it's not him personally, it's the circumstances. And so I think if there's one person on the bridge who's known to be there, and then the video shows around that time somebody kidnapping them, there's a good chance that that's the person who did it. Not beyond reasonable doubt by itself, but a good chance that that's the person who did it. So I made my own little set of formulas here to try and put these things into the bucket. So I said, hey, if it's less than 15%, that's a no. And a very unlikely would be 15 to 40%. And a somewhat unlikely 40 to 50, somewhat likely 50 to 60, very likely 60 to 85, and then a yeah if it's over that. So this one I'm putting into this is right on the edge of very likely. One person doing the kidnapping, one person seen on the bridge around that time, but no certainty there because for reasons we'll talk about. So I put it in at 65%. And because this is an unusual situation where it's a bridge, okay? So no one's going to parachute in or climb up from the bottom. There's no ninjas or come from the sides because they don't float. You're either coming from one side of the bridge to the other. So I put that if that is not correct, then I put the rest of the 100% probability because it's 100% sure somebody on the bridge kidnapped them at 35%. So I said the person on the bridge, that's likely the person who did it. Likely. 65%, bordering on highly likely. And then therefore 35% chance that that's not correct, that it was not him who did it, even though he was on the bridge at the same time. And then when I put it into the formula, which I'll show here, type it into the calculator, that raises his chance of being the guilty person to 48%, which that moves Ron Logan and John Doe down to 26% each, because there's a 100% chance that it all happened, but only one of them did it. So he's at 48 now. And that's your first chance to be mad at me, because you may say it's not 65%, it's 50% or 40 or whatever. Well, I've got the link in the bottom. Go down and put those numbers into the calculator and do it and see what you come up with. I'm not arguing that my weight is perfect. I'm showing you this process. However, come on, people. If he was on the bridge, then it's likely that the person who was on the bridge is the one seen in the video. Not dispositive. It's still 48% even by the computer. So with those two pieces of information, that he was there at the time and that he was on the bridge at that time, those things by themselves, because of the presence of the other two potential criminals here, suspects, it's still only 48%. So nobody's voting he's guilty based on this. But that's the first piece of evidence that we've entered into the computer, and it puts the odds at 48%. The next piece of evidence, beyond the fact that it was somebody on the bridge who did it, because we know that from the video, is the fact the video does tell us that this person was traveling from the west to the east, from the northwest down to the southeast toward the girls. And you have to think, is it highly likely that the person who was on the northwest side of the bridge is the one who's traveling to the southeast versus the people from the southeast traveling up to the northwest? Because there's a picture of him coming toward them from the northwest. So that suggests that the person who did it was coming from that direction. And that's only Richard Allen and not the other two guys. It's not 100% though, because of some people have said, well, the person on the other side of the bridge, the hypothetical John Doe or Logan, they could have gotten on the bridge while the girls were on it and walked past them and turned around and come back. Okay. And that is possible. That's possible. I agree with that. But it doesn't seem likely to me, obviously, that that person is going to go past them and just keep on walking for a considerable distance onto the bridge before turning around and coming back. And the picture that they took and the little video they took, what we've seen, the person coming toward them, the bridge guy, is still pretty far away from them. So this person went well past these girls and then turns around and comes back. And we don't even know that that's where the person turned around at. We just know that's the part of the video that we got with them saying, wow, he's behind us. So there's no indication that somebody came and passed them on a bridge and turned around and came back. They didn't say that. And why would a person go onto this rickety bridge who wants to abduct these girls and move so far past them? How do you know they're not going to get to the end of the bridge and take off running? So I can buy that somebody comes onto the bridge, turns around and passes them to hold them from going back, retreating on the bridge, and says, go down the hill. It's much harder for me to buy that this person would travel way out onto the bridge in the wrong direction and then come back. It's much more likely, and you know it is, that the person who was on the northwest side of the bridge coming to the east, that's the person pictured in the video rather than somebody going out there and turning around. But that's not 100%. I give you that. So the weight I put on that was pretty high, 70%. I think it's at least 70% likely that the person shown on that video coming from the west side of the bridge to the east started out on the west side of the bridge coming toward the east rather than going onto the bridge, saying good day to the girls passing by them, going way out onto the bridge and turning around and coming back. So I left a 30% chance there that it was some other situation, somebody coming and passing them. But I took 10 off for that because one of the 3 out of the 30 could also be Allen. He might have come past them, gone back over there and then come back. That's just as likely as these other dudes going past them back and forth. So I put a 20% chance that it was a different scenario and a 70% chance that it was the person who started out on that side of the bridge was the person who was coming toward them. So when I did that, that goes into the calculator and it results in a 70% likelihood probability that it was Richard Allen, and only 12% each for Ron Logan and John Doe. So that's getting up there now. We're saying, yeah, it was probably him. It was probably him. He was on that side of the bridge. The video shows a guy walking from that side of the bridge. He said he didn't see anybody else out there. The only other witnesses saw him. The timeline is bad for him. And that's my common sense about it. And the statistics seem to back that up. Now, again, you may quibble with the 20% and want to change that. Throw it in a calculator. It'd be interesting to see what results you might get. I think 70 is fair because I would have gone with a higher percentage based on human behavior as I see it, but that's just an opinion. All right, so Richard Allen didn't see anybody else on the bridge, he says, the whole time that he was standing on the bridge and walking back, but there were people on the bridge. So if he said that and he's guilty, then either he left that path to get out of there or he didn't want to admit to seeing anybody. And if it's true because he's not guilty, then maybe he just didn't see anybody because he wasn't paying attention, even though he saw the other three girls. And maybe all of them didn't see him either. Maybe. Nobody saw anybody, but they all saw everyone else except for him as he became invisible. Now, if he had said, I walked to the end of the bridge and left via the woods, no one would see him on the way back. But that's not what he said. He said he traveled back to along the path and went back to his car, and he never saw anybody after he saw the three girls up at the top end of the bridge on his way in. Never saw the two girls, Libby and Abby, never saw the female witness, never saw any of the other people that came onto the bridge later who were there when he says he was there. That's a piece of evidence because it's part of his story. It's kind of like when Murdaugh said, I was never at the kennels. Well, he was at the kennels and he was lying, and why would he lie? So you may judge that he's lying here, and you might not. Again, it's no certainty here. But I put it at a 70% chance that he would have seen at least one of these other people on his way back if he'd actually walked down the path, and a 30% chance that he didn't. Maybe you think it's only 50% likely that on this narrow path he would have seen any of the other people on the bridge. Maybe you even think it's 40%, but people just don't see each other or whatever. Why do you see the three girls? I don't know. But if you want to change your percentage, you can. But I think that you would note that, yeah, I couldn't describe them, but I did see some other people. I didn't see anybody. So I think there's a 70% chance that that's crap, and a 30% chance that it's just he didn't see anybody. And when I throw that in the computer, now I go up to 88%, because here's the guy who was on the bridge when it happened. Here's the guy who was traveling toward them from the direction of where he was that the video shows the perpetrator coming from. I don't think he knew about that video or whoever did it at that time. And then we have him not seeing anyone else, because he wasn't seen on the trail leaving either. And that's another piece of evidence. So maybe he had his head down and walked out without ever seeing anybody. I've given that a third chance. I mean, that's fair, I think, for his sake. Well, I did the same thing for people seeing him. They saw each other, they saw other people, but maybe at the moment they passed by Richard Allen, they had their heads down. That could be true. It's just unlikely. So I put that at a 70-30 as well. Change it if you want. But statistically, probability-wise, that puts him up at 94%. It's looking pretty bad for him now. Just this whole timeline situation felt bad to me. It analyzed bad as I tried to put some logic and common sense on it. And this formula, at least, based on the inputs that I'm putting into it, support the conclusion that I have. Now, garbage in, garbage out. If my inputs are wrong in terms of percentages, the formula is going to throw out a different number. But it's telling me that my logic of feeling like, yeah, this is the guy, is backed up by the math of this. Like, there's not a broken process there in my brain. And if you have lower percentages and you get a different result, then it would support you too, but it might surprise you. I would encourage you to try it. So there's another piece of evidence. A witness saw a walker on the road who was allegedly bloody and muddy. I agree. Don't buy that whole hog. Absolutely not. I don't think that person made up seeing somebody, but the description, we don't know who it is. We don't really know what they mean by that or whatever. So for this walker, we don't know if it was the killer or not. So it's automatically reducing the odds of the importance of this information. But I will say this, if it was one of these three people, because one of them is likely the killer, if it was one of these three, it ain't Logan. He doesn't need to go out to the road and walk west away from his own property after killing two girls on his own property. He would just go up to his house, right? So it ain't him. So if it was someone, then it was either John Doe or Richard Allen. And you have to wonder about Allen here, because this is consistent with the fact he says he didn't see anybody on the trail when he went west to get back to his car, and no one saw him on the trail going west to get back to his car. And someone sees this person after the crime occurs walking west towards where his car was. But it's not a gigantic piece of evidence, even though they said he was muddy and bloody, but it's a piece of evidence. It moved the needle on it a little bit on my set of calculations here from 94 to 96%. And that brings us to the last piece of evidence that I've got in this, which is the 40 caliber round. Now, if it were his 40 caliber round, for sure, if we just knew it, right? If we absolutely knew it, which we don't, but if we did, then I'm going to say, you know, that's like the kennel video in the Murdaugh case. Okay. He did it. Okay. You can imagine aliens and things like that, or eagles or whatever, but that's imaginary reasons. It's not reasonable doubt. If that round came out of his gun between those two murdered girls, he's the guy who did it. And he told police, I hadn't been down there another time, so don't act like he was hiking on this property. There was no trail there anyway at that spot. And he said he hadn't been there, and he hadn't loaned his gun out. So any other reasonable excuses, he took them out of the picture. And the eagle picking up a loaded round from his property and taking it over there and dropping it between two dead girls, and that's not, no. He did it, if that's it, if that came from his gun. But we don't know that, okay? What we have is an examiner's opinion based on tool mark analysis. Now, what's that going to be weighted at? Here's what it's not going to be. The social media thinkers that go, it's just junk, it's worth nothing. You don't know that. You don't know how distinctive these marks are. You haven't seen it. And you don't know how skilled or unskilled the examiner is. You have no idea what they base their opinion on. So what you're seeing is that's the junk part. The junk part is what is the thing that you're saying there. And that is further enhanced by the fact that I've seen people say, well, it's junk, it won't even be admitted into court. It's unlikely it'll be admitted in court. The Indiana Supreme Court has held that tool mark analysis on cases can be introduced in trial even when you don't have the gun that produced the marks on the cases. You could just compare the cases. Here they have the gun that they're saying created these marks, and they used it in a lab, and you know they did it more than once and all that stuff. So it's going to come in as evidence unless something surprising occurs. And your opinion of whether it's junk or not is just your own opinion. What it will really amount to is simply this. How convincing is the examiner? How good of a witness is this? Like, do they seem very skilled? Are they able to explain what they did well and convince the jury that their analysis of the comparison that these came from the same things? Look at these marks. This is all the same. It doesn't look like this other thing. Did they buy that or not? And on the defense side, you know, they've got different ways to attack it. They can show the pictures of the marks and say, this is microscopic. It could have come from anything. They can attack the examiner's process, how they did it, or their education, or the ability to have come up with this opinion. They can also put their own expert in, and I assume they will, who will say it's not from the same gun, or you can't say it's from the same gun because of these reasons. And that all goes to the weight of the evidence and not whether it actually occurred or not. Now, this kind of evidence gets used in cases all the time. And it was used in the Murdaugh case. It was used in the Texas serial killer case. I mean, it's just used all the time. Social media people, they don't know that, but it's a fact. Just look at the cases. And so you consider whether a jury is going to weight this evidence or not. And it's not going to be 100%. You can't say, well, if the jury hears it, they'll go for it. But I think there's a better than half chance, as it currently stands, that they're going to say this is persuasive evidence. But I could be wrong. We'll have to see what the defense says. But that's my opinion at this point. Maybe you just say it's a toss-up and you put 50%. Or maybe you say, without even seeing the evidence at all, that you consider it not credible evidence, and then you will say it's lower than 50% to some other number. But I'm saying based on the examiner's opinion brings it up higher than 50%. So I put it at 65%, but I discounted it for the possibility that there's some other scenario how this round could have gotten there, even though I don't think it. There's just not much in life that's certain. And that got me to 64% weight. So that takes, the calculator produces a result of 98% based on all the information input as it is, that Richard Allen is the person who did it as compared to Logan or the John Doe. And there's no one else to compare to because we don't think anybody else could have been there at the crime scene. So that's 98%. That's right around guilty time there. I mean, you think what if the jury would have gamed it out percentage-wise, say in the Murdaugh case, where they didn't have direct evidence or even serious circumstantial evidence of a type like DNA, they still found him guilty. And a lot of it was to do with closing that window of time between when the victims never heard from again and him being there and the fact he lied about it. So in this case, Allen was there, and he was there at the time that the attack occurred, which we know the time of the attack because of the video. The perpetrator probably didn't know about that. Murdaugh didn't know about the Snapchat video. And his story of not seeing anyone else, not encountering anyone else, actually reduces the chance that it was anyone else. So this case looks kind of bad for him. 98%, is that enough to vote guilty or not? That's just an opinion. And also you might get different numbers, higher or lower, based on your inputs. But what this does for me is I think they have a good case against him, better than what some people think. And this kind of matches what I'm thinking about it. In an actual trial, of course, the defense gets to take shots at this case, and you have to be willing to listen to that. You can't go to social media reasoning where you just ignore anything to the contrary. And the prosecution may have other evidence too, and we don't know how this is going to go. And a final comment on this in terms of as you look through this, and if you use the calculator, what evidence you put into it, is some people will say things like, it's just circumstantial. It's just a circumstantial case. And what they're doing there is they're justifying ignoring things under social media thinking by using a word that they've heard called circumstantial, like that's poor evidence or something. So in the Murdaugh case, for example, the Snapchat video, that was circumstantial. But guess what else is circumstantial? If there'd been a gun there with his DNA on it, or a knife there and they'd been stabbed with his DNA on it, that is also circumstantial. Direct evidence doesn't require an inference that the crime was committed by this person. So you could have an eyewitness 100 yards away say they saw person A do the crime, but then when you go investigate it, you find at the scene that there's a knife there with blood on it and DNA on it that fits person B, who was also nearby. Now, which one do you think is more likely to be right? The 100-yard away person or the DNA? But the DNA is circumstantial because you're having to make an inference to B, whereas A is a direct shot. I saw this person do it. So direct evidence is not always of a higher quality than circumstantial evidence, and circumstantial evidence can be extremely high quality. All evidence can be high or low quality, it just depends on what it is. And that's why you put these weights in this. And that is the flaw in, I can't tell you there's a 98% chance that he did this. It's just the calculations I get from this formula based on the weight I put into the beginning. And it's fair to attack it on that basis. But it's an interesting tool. I enjoyed using it. And I got it from somebody who is observing this case. There's some pretty smart people watching this case who applied substantially more rigorous logic to analyzing the evidence even before this calculator than I did in earlier videos I've done, and shared that with me. And then also shared this process of testing a hypothesis, the probability of it, through using this mathematical formula. And it's not, as it applies to crime situations, it's not perfect because you got to make subjective judgments about the evidence you put in and the weights and things like that. But it's a testing tool for whether the logic you're using really adds up or not, and which piece of evidence really moves the needle and which one doesn't based on what you're telling the computer. It's an interesting way to see a case, a third way, because I haven't used this before. I mean, I've guessed at odds before and told clients that and things, but I haven't used a tool like this. So if you found it interesting, go to the link and try it out yourself. I would be interested if somebody puts in pieces of evidence with their own weights and calculates it and see what kind of odds they get. That would be interesting. If it's boring, sorry, but I enjoyed it, and I like it, learning how to think about things from a different perspective, because there is not a lot that's certain, and you're using your reasoning ability, hopefully, to try and figure things out, and that's a tool for this. Thanks, bye.